Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talk Sara English. I'm Sarah, and I'm really happy you're here with us today.
And I'm Mike. It's great to have you with us. Wherever you are listening, maybe at home, on your way to work, or taking a quiet walk, we hope you can relax and enjoy this English conversation.
Today, we're going to talk about something very useful in everyday English: experiences. We all have experiences, but sometimes it can be difficult to explain them naturally, especially when someone asks, "What have you done?" or "Have you ever experienced that?"
Exactly. So today we'll practice talking about experiences in clear, natural English for B1 to B2 learners. We'll talk about things we have done, places we have visited, people we have met, challenges we have faced, and moments that have changed the way we think.
And while you listen, don't worry about understanding every single word. Try to follow the main idea, notice useful expressions, and listen to how we connect one sentence to another.
You can also pause sometimes and answer your own answer. If we ask, "Have you ever traveled alone?" you can think about your own answer before listening to ours.
That's a great way to make this episode active. You're not just listening to English, you're using your own memories to help you understand and remember the language.
So let's begin with a simple question. Sarah, when you hear the word experience, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
I think about something that happened to me and taught me something. An experience doesn't have to be exciting or unusual. Even an ordinary day can become an important experience if it changes the way you see something.
I agree. For example, your first day at a new job can be an experience. You might feel nervous, meet new people, make a mistake, and learn something.
Exactly. And English has several useful ways to talk about these moments. One of the most common questions is, "Have you ever?" We use it when we want to know if someone has had an experience at any time in their life.
For example, have you ever visited another country? Or have you ever spoken English with a stranger?
And the answer can be short: "Yes, I have," or "No, I haven't." But in a real conversation, we usually want to continue.
Right. Instead of only saying, "Yes, I have," you can add a little information. "Yes, I have. I visited Turkey a few years ago, and I really enjoyed the food."
Or you could say, "No, I haven't, but I'd love to try it someday." That makes the conversation more natural and gives the other person something to respond to.
Let's try a few examples together. Sarah, have you ever traveled somewhere completely alone?
Yes, I have. A few years ago, I traveled alone for the first time. At the beginning, I was nervous because I had to make every decision by myself.
That sounds challenging. What was the hardest part?
Probably finding my way around a new city. I remember arriving at the train station with my luggage, looking at a map, and realizing that I had no idea which direction to go.
That is a stressful moment, especially when you're carrying bags.
It was, but after a few minutes, I asked someone for help. That was actually one of the most useful parts of the experience because I realized that asking for help was not something to be embarrassed about.
That's an important lesson. Sometimes an experience teaches us something because a situation does not go exactly as planned.
Yes, and that is one reason experiences are so useful when we talk about them in English. We can describe not only what happened, but also how we felt and what we learned.
Let's look at those three parts. First, what happened. Second, how you felt. And third, what you learned or what happened afterward.
For example, I could say, "I traveled alone. I felt nervous at first, but I became more confident. In the end, I learned that I could handle unfamiliar situations."
That is much more interesting than simply saying, "I traveled alone."
Exactly. When you tell a story, small details make your English more engaging. You can describe where you were, who was there, what happened first, and what happened next.
And you can use phrases like "at first," "after that," "a few minutes later," "in the end," and "eventually."
These expressions help your listener follow the story. They're like little signs that show the order of events.
I really like that idea. They help organize your story without making it sound too formal. They make stories clearer, especially when speaking without preparing every sentence in advance.
Another useful expression is one of the most. We use it when we want to describe an experience that was especially important or memorable.
For example, that was one of the most exciting trips I've ever taken, or it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made.
Let's talk about difficult experiences for a moment, because not every experience is positive.
That's true. Sometimes we learn the most from experiences that are uncomfortable, disappointing, or even frightening.
Mike, can you remember a difficult experience that taught you something important?
Definitely. One experience that comes to mind happened when I started my first full-time job. I was excited, but I also wanted to prove that I could do everything perfectly.
That sounds familiar. A lot of people feel that way when they start something new.
Yes, and because I wanted to make a good impression, I accepted too much work. I thought saying yes to everything would make people think I was responsible.
And what happened?
After a few weeks, I became exhausted. I had too many things to finish, and I started making small mistakes because I was trying to do everything at once.
So, what did you learn from that experience?
I learned that being responsible does not mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes you need to know your limits and communicate clearly.
That is a very useful lesson, especially for people who are starting their careers.
Yes, looking back, I'm actually grateful for that experience because it changed the way I work.
Notice how Mike told that story. He explained the situation, described the problem, and then explained what he learned.
And there is another useful expression here, looking back. We use it when we think about something that happened in the past and consider it from our present point of view.
For example, looking back, I think moving to that city was the right decision.
Or, looking back, I wish I had asked more questions.
That second example is especially useful because experiences can also involve things we regret.
Yes, sometimes we can say, I wish I had, when we regret something we did not do in the past.
For example, I wish I had taken more pictures, or I wish I had spent more time with my grandparents.
These sentences are useful when you want to talk about experiences in a deeper and more personal way.
Now let's move to something a little more positive. Have you ever met someone who had a strong influence on you?
Yes, I have. Actually, there was a teacher I had when I was younger who changed the way I thought about learning.
What was special about that teacher?
She never made students feel embarrassed when they made mistakes. Instead, she encouraged us to try again.
That sounds like a wonderful teacher.
She used to say that making mistakes was part of learning. At the time, I didn't completely understand how important that idea was.
But later you realized it?
Exactly. Years later, when I started learning new skills, I remembered what she had said. I became less afraid of making mistakes.
That shows how one person can influence us without even realizing it.
Yes, sometimes you don't understand the importance of an experience until much later.
I think that is true for many experiences. Something can seem ordinary when it happens, but years later you realize it was actually an important moment.
And when you talk about those experiences in English, you can use phrases such as at the time, later on, years later, and eventually.
Let's practice another common question. What is the best experience you've ever had?
That is a difficult question because there can be many answers.
Exactly. You don't need to choose the most exciting experience. It can simply be something that made you feel happy or grateful.
For me, one of my best experiences was a trip I took with some close friends. We didn't have a perfect plan, and that actually made the trip more enjoyable.
What happened?
We decided to visit a small town we had never been to before. We arrived late in the afternoon, found a small hotel, and then walked around without knowing exactly where we were going.
That sounds like a nice kind of adventure.
It was. We found a small restaurant, talked to the owner, and ended up staying there much longer than we expected.
Sometimes the best moments are the ones you don't plan.
Exactly. We didn't have a schedule. We just explored the town, talked, laughed, and enjoyed being together.
And that brings us to another useful word, memorable.
Memorable means something that is easy to remember because it was special or important.
You could say, it was a very memorable trip, or meeting her was one of the most memorable moments of my life.
Another useful expression is, I'll never forget. It's a simple way to introduce an important memory.
For example, I'll never forget the first time I saw the ocean.
Or, I'll never forget how nervous I felt before my first presentation.
And when you tell a story, emotions are important. Instead of only describing what happened, tell us how you felt.
You can say, I was nervous, I was surprised, I felt relieved, I was disappointed, or I was incredibly excited.
Relieved is especially useful. It means you feel better because something difficult or worrying has ended.
For example, I was really relieved when I finally passed my driving test.
That is a perfect example. You can imagine the pressure before the test and the feeling afterward.
And you can also say, I was proud of myself. That is useful when you achieve something after working hard.
For example, I was proud of myself when I gave my first presentation in English.
Now, let's imagine someone asks you, what have you been up to recently?
That is another very natural question. It means, what have you been doing recently? It's often used when people haven't talked for some time.
You could say, I've been working a lot lately, or I've been trying to improve my English.
You can also give a little more detail. I've been taking English classes, and I've also started listening to podcasts every morning.
Notice that this question is slightly different from, what did you do yesterday? One asks about a recent period, while the other focuses on a specific past time.
That difference is useful because English often changes depending on whether we are talking about a finished event or an experience connected to the present.
For example, I went to Spain last year talks about a finished trip at a specific time.
But I've been to Spain 3 times talks about your life experience without giving a specific time.
Exactly. When someone asks, have you ever been to Spain? You can answer, yes, I have. I went there last year.
So the first sentence talks about the experience, and the second gives us the specific event.
This is a very natural pattern in conversation.
And you can use the same pattern with many experiences. Have you ever eaten sushi? Yes, I have. I tried it for the first time when I was in Japan.
Have you ever spoken in front of a large audience? Yes, I have. I gave a presentation at work last year.
Have you ever lost something important? Yes, I have. I lost my phone on a train once.
These small question and answer patterns are useful because they help you keep a conversation going.
And if someone tells you about an experience, you can ask follow-up questions. You can say, what happened? How did you feel? What did you do next? Or what did you learn from it?
Those questions show interest and they encourage the other person to continue speaking.
So when you are having an English conversation, don't feel that you always need to have a completely new topic.
Exactly. One experience can create a whole conversation if you ask good questions and listen carefully to the answers.
That's a great point, Mike. When someone tells you about an experience, a good conversation is usually built from small questions and natural reactions.
Exactly. You don't need complicated questions. Even something simple like, really? Or, what happened after that? Can encourage someone to continue.
And you can show interest with expressions such as, that sounds amazing. That must have been difficult. I can imagine, or I would have felt the same way.
These expressions are useful because conversations are not only about giving information, they are also about reacting to what another person says.
Let's imagine I tell you, I once got completely lost in a foreign city.
I might say, really? What happened? And then you can tell me the story.
Well, I was visiting a city I had never been to before. I had been walking around for several hours, and I thought I knew where I was going.
But you didn't?
Not at all. I suddenly realized that I had walked much farther than I expected. My phone battery was almost dead, and I couldn't find the street where my hotel was.
That sounds stressful.
It was. At first, I tried to stay calm. Then I saw a small cafe, so I went inside and asked the person working there if they could help me.
And were they able to help?
Yes, they showed me the direction on a map and even wrote the name of the street on a piece of paper.
That was kind of them.
It really was. And eventually, I found my way back to the hotel. I was exhausted, but I was also proud of myself.
That is a good example of how an experience can have several emotions. You were worried, then relieved, and finally proud.
Exactly. And that makes the story much more interesting than simply saying, I got lost.
Another useful thing to remember is that you don't always need to tell a long story. Sometimes a short answer is enough, especially in a casual conversation.
Right. If someone asks, have you ever tried skiing? You can simply say, yes, I have. I tried it once when I was younger, but I wasn't very good at it.
And that small answer gives the other person an opportunity to ask another question.
They might ask, was it difficult? Or would you try it again?
And you can continue naturally from there.
This is something English learners sometimes find difficult. They know many words, but when someone asks them a question, they give a very short answer and the conversation stops.
One way to avoid that is to add one extra detail.
Yes, if someone asks, have you ever worked abroad? Don't just say yes.
You can say, yes, I have. I worked abroad for 6 months, and it was a great learning experience.
Now the other person has something to ask about.
They might ask, where did you work? Or what did you learn?
And suddenly you have a real conversation.
Another useful strategy is to connect your experience to a feeling or opinion.
For example, I've visited several big cities, but New York was probably the most exciting because there was always something happening.
Or, I've tried working from home and I actually prefer it because I can concentrate better.
This helps you move from simply describing an experience to expressing your personality.
And that is important in everyday English. People usually want to know not only what you did, but what you thought about it.
Let's talk about another common experience, learning something difficult.
Good idea. Sarah, have you ever learned a skill that seemed impossible at first?
Yes, learning to drive was like that for me. When I started, I felt nervous every time I got behind the wheel.
What made you nervous?
There were so many things to remember. I had to think about the road, the mirrors, the other cars, the signs, and everything else at the same time.
I remember that feeling. At first, it seems like your brain is trying to do 10 things at once.
Exactly. I remember coming home after one lesson and thinking, how am I ever going to become comfortable with this?
But eventually you did.
Yes, I kept practicing, and slowly things became more automatic. I stopped thinking about every small movement.
That is another important part of experiences. Progress is often difficult to notice while it is happening.
That's true. Sometimes you feel like you are not improving, but when you look back after several months, you realize how far you have come.
This is also true when learning English.
Absolutely. Maybe today you feel nervous when you speak English, but after months of practice, you may suddenly realize that you can understand conversations that once seemed impossible.
Or you may notice that you can tell a story without translating every sentence in your head.
That is a very important experience for a language learner.
So if you're learning English, remember to notice your progress. Don't only focus on what you still cannot do.
Look at what you can do now that you couldn't do before.
Maybe you can introduce yourself more confidently. Maybe you can understand movies better. Maybe you can have a short conversation with a stranger.
Every one of those things is an experience worth remembering.
And you can practice English by talking about them.
Let's review some of the most useful expressions from today's conversation.
First, have you ever? Use it to ask whether someone has had a particular experience at any time in their life.
For example, have you ever traveled alone?
Then we have I've never, which is useful when you have not experienced something.
I've never traveled alone, but I'd like to try it someday.
Another useful expression is one of the most. For example, that was one of the most exciting experiences I've ever had.
We also used looking back, which helps us talk about the way we understand a past experience now.
Looking back, I think it was a good decision.
And don't forget at the time. It helps you describe how you felt or thought during a particular period in the past.
For example, at the time, I was very nervous, but now I think it was a valuable experience.
We also talked about memorable, which describes something special that you remember easily.
And relieved, which describes the feeling you have when something stressful or worrying is finally over.
Finally, remember the simple structure we practiced. Start with what happened.
Then explain how you felt.
Add a few details about what happened next.
And, if possible, finish by explaining what you learned, what changed, or how you feel about it now.
For example, I once gave a presentation in English. I was extremely nervous at first, and I made a few mistakes, but I finished it successfully, and afterward I felt really proud. Looking back, it helped me become much more confident.
That is a complete answer, and it sounds natural because it includes the event, the emotion, and the result.
Now think about one experience from your own life that you could describe in English.
It could be your first day at school, your first job, a trip you took, a difficult decision you made, someone you met, something you learned, or even a funny mistake.
Start with a simple question. Have you ever? Then think about one experience that comes to mind.
After that, try to explain what happened, how you felt, and what you learned from it.
Don't worry if your English isn't perfect. The goal is to communicate your experience clearly.
And remember, your experiences are part of what makes your English personal. You don't need to copy someone else's stories. Talk about your own life, your own memories, and your own ideas.
The more you practice describing real experiences, the easier it becomes to speak naturally without searching for every single word.
So, take a moment today to think about one experience you remember clearly and try to describe it in English, even if you only speak for 1 or 2 minutes. That's all for this episode. Take care and keep learning. Bye, everyone.